Thank you for joining us today to another Central Elevation webinar. Okay, I'm your host, Nando Mogollon, and today we'll be touching base on the model quality phase of the webinar series. So today we're going to touch base on part one. We're going to divide these at least in two other parts, depending on how we go about it. And the idea will be that we will cover some of the basics of the auditing, not only your own file, but others' incoming files as we go working into a project. The type of auditing that we're going to do in these couple of webinars, 2 or 3 of them, will be checking modeling errors and minimal acceptable requirements. That's pretty much the basic type of errors that you will get when you're simply within the process of putting together a 3D model for the sake of creating a shared or federated assembly for the entire model. So there are going to be a few errors there that don't really have much to do with either the BIM requirements or exchange information requirements or the requirements of the project itself, or even the digital asset at the end. These are very basic models that we want to catch before you share your models with others. Within those, we'll touch base on things like duplication and partial intersections, missing or completely wrong IFC classifications. And as you know, you may get things completely, working perfectly well within your Archicad files, and they'll be outputting very good drawings, but that doesn't mean that the model that comes out of that model file will be as good. So you need to check the actual classification itself. And then we'll have things that we will consider to be something like sensible sizes or sizes that should be representative of an actual construction element. Think of it as, columns that are too long or walls that are too short to be walls or to be considered actual walls. And that typically is based on the idea that some of these projects, some of these models may be using model elements that you just use them because they're easy to use, but maybe you forgot to classify them correctly. And then that typically will have the consequence of being considered to be a wrong size, but some of them can be actual problems of putting it together. So modeling errors will be what we're going to touch on today. If you manage to catch on the next webinars, we're going to go in and check model quality for project requirements. Putting together a project information model depending on what the requirements for the exchange, so that is across all the disciplines, and you want to make sure that you're producing a model that actually complies with those requirements. And then at the very end, and this one we may need to split it in 2 additional ones, but we'll see how it goes. We're going to check functionality, that is, make sure that the elements have enough working space around them, that there are no proximity and functional spaces that require elements to be inside those spaces, and so on. Constructability, ensuring that the model is being put together in a way that actually can be built, and it won't cheat things like 4D or 5D for quantity and sequencing, and anything that could be, we can say, there could be code-related issues. So we're going to double check on those on future webinars. Today, we're going to focus essentially on modeling errors. All right, and then, of course, we'll check these in 2 ways. We'll use Archicad for a pre-export audit. So there are a couple of things that you can still do within Archicad without having to export these to IFC. And then, of course, once you export the IFC with a dedicated translator, you want to double check or auditing your model in a tool like Solibri for the sake of ensuring that what you're sending, it's actually according to what you have required to be sent. And it's especially a model that doesn't have these type of basic errors. Okay, so let's get started with this. So the first part, we want to see what is it that we're going to check within Archicad. So I'm going to use a couple of tools, one of them very old tools, and one of them is going to be a fairly new one. Type of things we're going to check is duplication. So these are full and precise duplication of elements in which you can't hardly notice that there are two elements because they are exactly in the same place. That is, something that could be happening, particularly if you have less expertise in the team that is putting together the model. But there is a version of that which is not a full duplication, but rather a partial intersection of elements. And that could happen particularly within elements of the same type. And as you know, elements of different types, walls and slabs, walls, columns and beams, beams and slabs, and so on, they join together based on the building material priorities. So they actually have a way to react to each other without causing these type of problems, normally speaking. But when you have elements of the same type, two columns on the same type, or two columns overlapping, two walls overlapping, two slabs overlapping, that's a fairly more difficult thing to find. And in Archicad, you can see those things, particularly when you're in section, and then you'll see missing cut lines and so on. But generally speaking, that's a manual process where to find a way where you can find that automatically. Another type of modeling error is missing IFC types. So you may have a model that produces good drawings, as I said before, but then you may be missing completely the fact that one of the elements you simply just forgot to classify it altogether. So it's hasn't been classified at all. A subcategory of that type of error is the situation where you may have classified the element, but somehow the layer, which is typically the type of thing you use for dropping things into a filtering system, also has an indication of what the element is or to what system it belongs. Normally speaking, these two things, the IFC type and the layer, might be related or might be related somehow. It is very normal to have IFC walls in layers that have the word wall within them, or at least an acronym for those walls. Whatever your naming convention is, it is very likely that things like a layer and an IFC type might be related. But you want to double check that that relationship still exists. What are you trying to catch in there? You're trying to catch situations where you were using slabs for flooring, and then eventually you needed to fix a piece of the ceiling, and then you just forgot to change the classification. In that case, your ceiling, it's actually built with the slab tool with the right layer, but then the classification, it's still remembering it to be just a flooring or a slab, right? In such a case, the two things won't be related, and then you may be able to catch those issues. And then the last we want to check is problems with sizing or sensible sizes. This is a case where you may have elements that are built with a wall tool, classified as walls, but then they probably were not actual walls, but rather a cladding or a piece of glass or something like that. And then the thickness is not quite what you will expect it to be for a proper wall. Same thing will happen if the wall is either too short or the slabs are too thin, etc., etc., etc. So there are certain logical sizes that you will expect those building elements to have. And you can control that, and you can catch those within Archicad with some constraints or limits, depending on what you're trying to do. All right, so as we said, we're going to drop this or split this in two. We're going to check the preventive way to catch these errors in Archicad. So that's going to be the pre-export. Then the model will be exported, and then we will see the kind of things you can catch once you drop the IFC model in Solibri. All right, so let's start by using Archicad right here. And as I said, we're going to split this in a couple of pieces. First one will be duplication and intersection. If you have been using Archicad for a while, you may remember that there is still an add-on within the goodies list that once you install it, it will check duplicates. It's actually called just check duplicates. That is a palette that you can find within the edit menu, check duplicates, and then either select or delete. It actually runs the check immediately. Only really large models is gonna blink a couple of times. But it actually gives you a hint of how many full and complete duplicates do you have in the file. So this is still an option. It's fairly raw, but still one that I like to use every now and then because it tells me when, particularly when you copy and paste or drag a copy, you may be dragging things that are not supposed to be included in the copy. So how do you work with this? Essentially, just do the selection of the duplicates. You click on select. The element is going to be selected, and you can tell because the info box will immediately gather those elements. And also, the element will be selected in the view. Now, if you're in a situation like this where the element is going to be hidden through, behind a bunch of other elements, probably the best thing you can do from this, it will be, well, actually one of the two. You can either just isolate the element with a simple show selection, like so, and then that's going to show me where the element actually is, like so. Or you can use the zoom to selection, like so, which is pretty much the same. Now, this is going to tell you, look, there are two elements in the same place, and then it will be up to you to either delete one or the other. That's fairly simple, and it will catch full duplication. Let me reset this. Now, there's another way of doing it, which is a way of using the collision detection inside Archicad. So if you go to design, and this is in Archicad 24, by the way, where the collision detection option is being replaced by a model check option. And at the moment, this particular tool allows you to run a basic collision detection similar to what we showed very early on in the webinar series. And in here, what I've done is I've already built essentially two filters of the same kind. So right now I'm checking for walls and columns in group 1, and pretty much the same thing, walls and columns without any difference in group number 2. Now that's essentially faking a duplication check, but not only a duplication, it will also check for overlapping elements. So if I go and run this, and you can set certain tolerances if you need to. Click on check, it will trigger the model check report, which is kind of new, so different to previous versions of Archicad. This is not going to create issues right away, rather it will give you a list of or a report with the issues, or problems that it found, and then you decide whether you want to create issues out of those or not. In this particular case, it has found some problems with walls, and you'll see one there, the one with the column, because it is still a collision, technically speaking, and another wall back here. Now, if you want to check what is it that it's finding, then all we need to do is simply, oh, and by the way, if you see up here, it's actually selecting two walls of the same kind. So I'm just going to go ahead and show the selection with the marquee. And then you'll see that what I have here is a not uncommon situation where a wall is being put right on top of the other one with just a partial, it's just overlapping for half of it. And it's the same for the other one. Right there. In this case, it's just a piece of a wall inside, completely inside the other one. So that's another thing that can be catched as a collision detection. Then, of course, what you do from there, just go select the one and get rid of it. Same thing for the column, although you saw that already. So those two things will allow you to find both duplication and partial overlaps. When it comes to finding, let me reset the view. When it comes to finding bad classifications or even elements that have been classified with either with the wrong class or the wrong layer, or a combination of the two, then you might be able to use graphic overrides. Now, graphic overrides are pretty good because they can catch quite a bunch of things and simply give you a graphical report on what's going on. So I built a few of them. Let me show you through what I've built in here. And this is just an example, but it will just work well for what you may need to do. So I've built two different things in here for that case. I built one that is going to check layers depending on the element types. And what I have is, just for the sake of giving you an example here, ceilings and floorings, where the ceiling filter, or sorry, the ceiling rule in here is checking every type, but then it goes ahead and says if the classification of the element is ceiling, then double check that if, or highlight this, if the layer doesn't have or doesn't contain the word, no, it's missing a C there, but the word ceiling within the layer name. Now, this of course will need to be adjusted depending on your own layer naming system, but essentially will be the same. Just comparing the two factors. And then when they don't match, it will give me will highlight the element in red. So that is for ceilings. The one for flooring is exactly the same, just changing the classification and the name of the layer, but it's basically comparing the two of them. Okay. Now I've got another one in here, which is essentially finding what we call in IFC terms a proxy, or a IFC building element proxy. What that one is doing is kind of similar, but it's actually checking that if I have completely forgotten to classify any elements. This one has a limitation, but I'll show you the workaround for the limitation. And the limitation for this is Archicad will check all the main elements, but there are at least three tools: the curtain wall, the railing, and the stair, which is also built of sub-elements or parts. And then those parts will need a classification as well. The criteria selection here is not capable of finding the classification within those elements, even though you can list it within here, but it won't be able to find the classification itself. So we need to get another way of doing that, but I'll show you that in a moment. So from here, it will do the same. We'll just highlight that in red. And the way I typically use that is combined with a if not kind of rule that essentially makes everything transparent if the elements have passed the first rule in there. So with those, what I can do then is switch to a 3D style without contours. That's going to facilitate the task of highlighting things. So right now, this one, I'm applying the filter for finding proxies. So that element in here, it's not being classified, as you can tell, so then it goes red. If I go ahead and switch to problems with layers for both flooring and ceiling, then I've got that one there. And by the way, it's not true that the elements are not there, it's just that they've been replaced with a air material. So that's the else rule that I have on my graphic overrides. But it's very good to highlight elements and hiding everything else without even having the wireframe in it. So this one here, it's a piece of, according to this, it's actually a piece of a ceiling that is being placed on a wall layer, a very common issue as well. All right, let's leave that there for now. And then we have the issue of having elements without the correct size. Oh, by the way, let me show you the workaround for sub-elements, because I know that there are sub-elements of the curtain wall that do not have the right classification. Now, because the graphic overrides are not capable of doing that, you may revert to a schedule, although, I don't want to show you schedules in here because I'm pretty sure you guys know how to create schedules and use them for this quality assurance check. But within the schedules, you can actually catch sub-elements because you can bring in sub-elements of different system tools like frames and panels. And then this particular list, it's only calling those who don't have a classification value to them. Once you have them like so, then you can just simply select them. And then once you click on selection, then they'll be displayed on your 3D window like so. So you can check their classification and classify them correctly if you need. So in that case, this classification needs to be amended. All right, now let's double check the other one that I have in there. So structural sizes. And for this, you'll need to run two different things. You can have that particular checking within a graphic override, like so, where what you're doing is highlighting elements depending on their sizes. So checking the minimum size of a wall. So saying, look for all the walls and double check that the overall thickness is bigger than 20 millimeters. Now, that's randomly chosen by me. You can have some other value that makes sense to your project. So I've chosen that for slabs and walls, similarly. And then they will highlight certain elements. Now, that's very easy in terms of highlighting things on the screen. But the reality is you can actually have something very, very similar and a little bit more into the constructability side. And that is with this new tool that you have in here within model check and model for physical model quality. Now, this one is highly related to the structural model itself and how it's been put together. But essentially what it does is you check these values here. It will actually check the relationship in between different values of the same element, the height and the length of beams, the cross section, for instance, the B value or thickness of a column compared to its height, trying to avoid columns that are too short or columns that are too wide for its height. Therefore, they might not be columns, they might be something else. Same thing for columns, walls and so on. So let's check walls, which is something that I built a few examples down here. And what this one is checking is the relationship between the height and the length. So that's going to catch things that are like too short for them to be proper walls. They might be just simply something else that someone decided to build with the wall tool, or they might be just simply walls that are too long to be built with a single piece. So let's go ahead and check that. Again, because I have only that one ticked, only that rule will apply. Oh, by the way, you can change these values at any point in time. Check that. It's going to give me certain errors in here. So it's going to give me, if you double click on them, it's going to show me some errors back here on the basement, for instance. That one, which is actually not a wall, but rather the ceiling bit. Trying to catch. Oh, yeah, got to change the value there. Anyway, I was trying to catch these two, but these two, the value to catch them will be more than twice its length if you want to run it to that extent. So all you need to do is go back to design, physical model check, and then just vary this back to 2. Notice that the previous elements that have been reported will stay there. They don't get eliminated. You just add more to them. This is a far more sensitive type of rule. Like so, anyway. you'll get to identify those elements or any of the elements according to that type of rule. Now, as always, I've already pre-cooked this with an IFC export for this. It's essentially the same one I've used for coordination. I just include a little bit more level of detail for the curtain walls, which are the only element bits that were not quite detailed in the first export, and then just send this across. Now let's double check the post checking or auditing of this file in Solibri. All right, so now we're in Solibri where I've loaded that particular file in here. And, altogether the file looks pretty okay. Solibri does have the really nice feature of having this searching functionality here, which allows you very, very quickly to find elements that have not been classified. Easily put, you just type in proxies or simply proxy, and Solibri will highlight and filter your 3D view, displaying all of the elements that have the word proxy within the identification fields. So you can tell the IFC entity and IFC type, they're both building element proxies. Therefore, they will be listed, both the cladding that I have up there and also the curtain wall here. So once the element is built into IFC, you don't have that issue anymore of not being able to find sub-elements because the IFC is a little bit more sensitive for that. Now, that's okay for visual checkings, and you can always resort to, go back here into the sub-element tree by the types, and then check what kind of elements you have under objects. And they're essentially going to display a very similar thing. But you want to rely on the model checking rules of Solibri to run these kind of quality checks or auditing. So what I've built in here is a single rule set, essentially checking the very same things. So I'm going to go relatively quick on this since we're running out of time. But if anything, we'll just show that again on our next webinar. What I have in here is the same 3 types of checkings. So I have checkings for duplications and intersections, checkings for the IFC entities, ensuring that everything's being classified correctly, and checking sensible sizes. Additional to that, I've also built a general checking for the structure of the file, which is something I can't really do within Archicad. Or if I do, it's going to be more like a manual process of creating lists and checking the lists and so on. What I've got in here is things like require more than components, where I can check if the model has whatever number of elements that I require it to have, or I'm expecting to see in this model. For instance, this one has no beams, no stairs, and no windows to that, and they were required according to this list. It also checks building floor names and their heights, or if there are levels without any elements belonging to those levels. You can also check floor heights, where you can check the minimum height of a particular or of different floors and maximum. Make sure that you don't have floors with 0 height and so on. And a bunch of other different things that we'll start checking in the next webinars as well. Jumping into duplication and intersection, similar to that, although Solibri is far more specialized on checking those bits and pieces, you can split it into individual elements, and we'll find duplications of any kind. For instance, this is checking walls and finding pretty much the same problems that we've found back in Archicad, where we've got this duplication in here, where we have this wall and that wall in the same place, but also it's composing parts. And the same thing in here. I have that one there and that one here. Same duplication type. Columns, it will find the same ones we found on the other side when we were on the pre-export side, and it will be able to catch those in here. Other intersections. Now this one is picking another bit that wasn't picked by Archicad, and this one is based on the cladding on the roof, which is finding this cladding to be, because it wasn't classified correctly. Now it's finding that the columns are going through that, and that seems to be a problem, and so on. So it will be a little bit more sensitive, that Archicad, into finding those issues. So that's for duplication. IFC entities, I can double check the native Archicad classification, where I can go ahead and say, look, go find me all the elements except openings and parts, and check that the Archicad classification is being defined. And then it will find that there are certain elements that do not have a value on that classification. For instance, that's the case of the cladding up there. The curtain walls bits, they're just classified incorrectly, or they're part of the entire element, and therefore they don't inherit a proper classification. Other things that you can find in here, then elements that do not have that may have a classification Archicad, but they're just defined as proxies. And in that case, we have those frames on the curtain wall that we were talking about. So these three down here. So you can pick that up either by their IFC type or simply by lacking a classification within Archicad. Other things you can check, same type of relationship in between the layer and the element type. And this can be done in two different ways. You can do it based on the relationship of the layers to the elements, or the elements to their layers. So for instance, if I'm checking walls to layers with the name walls to contain only IFC wall elements or curtain walls, then you can run it based on a rule that essentially checks all the elements, regardless of what they are, that will be contained by the layer with the word wall, or change the wall by whatever acronym you use or other naming convention. And then the type of components that we're expecting to find in there will be walls and curtain walls, for instance, or some additional element if you have it. Now this one seems to be okay. Checking this one is essentially doing the same thing, but floorings. And then this is going to give me an error, simply saying, look, I've found this element here, which you'll find it to be supposedly a flooring, but it's on the the type of element that this is not a flooring, but a slab with a subtype, rather than being an actual flooring. So the other ones in this particular file, if I show you there, but these ones here, these are covering elements, which are some sort of a finish sub-element that are flooring elements for that, and they are dropped into the layer flooring. This one here, it's actually this one here is the one that is actually a slab according to this, and requirements are that these type of finishes, they may be needed as coverings. Same thing for ceiling elements, similar to what we found on the other side on Archicad before we did the export. And in this case, what this is telling me is the opposite. This is check that runs the other way around. Go find me the types and check if they are on the right layer. In this particular case, we have this element, which is correctly classified as a suspended ceiling bit, but it's on the wrong layer, wall internal. So you can catch those things in here just as well. And then lastly, sensible sizes, for which Solibri does a very good job. We can check not only the relationships in between the different values, different geometry values of the element, it will also check maximum and minimum admissible values. For instance, if it's checking walls and curtain walls to be bigger than 500 millimeters in height. Now I can also restrict that by the thickness or the length. This one is just checking the heights. And then it will find that there are a few elements in here where, for instance, these are the samples that I was building in there. It's a wall that it's only 499 millimeters, and I'm asking for 500 minimum. Same thing for the thickness, typical issue as well, where sometimes we just build things that are not supposed to be a proper wall, but maybe a covering or a cladding. And since this one is not the case, it's remaining as a wall, then I built a check that says, look, if it's less than 20 millimeters, then just highlight it, and then this one will be highlighted accordingly. You can do the same with the length. That'll be the case for this, although, you know, those are a little bit more sensitive. You probably want to check those within specific construction systems that don't allow for certain lengths. But other than that, the question is, you can double check all of those values at any point in time. Same for slabs, and this is the case where so we will find the same issue, essentially saying, look, if that is a slab, and I believe that is because it's classified accordingly, then the thickness is not enough, because this one is checking that proper slabs, not finishes, but actual slabs, have a value somewhere between 30 millimeters and 1 meter thickness. Columns, these are passing all the rules, but then again, you can check all of those and just take those as a sample to auditing the file before you save it. So with this, you will be able to not only catch those issues, you know, all the issues with duplications, all the issues with bad classification systems, or at least a mismatch in between the classification systems and the layers, and overall sensible sizes for the elements. So making sure that they may derive into a problem of classifications or simply having the wrong values. So all of these can be then reverted back to Archicad by using BCF, or if you have it in the same computer, just looking back and forth will help you going through the issues. All right. Okay, we run a little bit of extra time there, but I hope you enjoyed the webinar and it was useful information for your actual projects. Don't forget to subscribe to our future webinars there on that link or by using that QR code on the screen. Remember to use our support hotline here in Australia and in New Zealand, either by calling that support hotline or by logging into myci at centralinnovation.com, where we also have more content in there. If you register and check all that content on mycentralinnovation.com, you'll get some of the latest updates and content we have produced for this latest version. And of course, don't forget to register for this webinar pretty much same time, usually on Tuesdays. And stay tuned where we're going to check the next bit of model checking for project requirements and EIR and exchanges, required element exchanges. And that will run on next Tuesday. So till then, have a good day.